In the suffocating heat of the auction, the hood falls and his gaze reveals not submission, but a dignity that the world tried to sell for crumbs. She believed she had purchased a prisoner, but something much greater began there. Subscribe to the channel and be surprised by this encounter that changes destinies. In the forgotten lands of rural Minas Gerais, during the years following the abolition of slavery, when the newly proclaimed republic was nothing more than a distant whisper, and dignity cost less than a handful of old coins, an improvised fair was established by men with dirty uniforms and clean ambition. It was 1889, and Brazil lived in times of uncertainty. While at the fringes of power, far from the capital's eyes, old practices merely changed their names. In Candeias do Norte, a village balanced between progress and oblivion, Teresa Campos arrived with her pregnancy visible beneath her worn dress, her dark hair tied in a careless bun, and a gaze that carried the strength of someone who knew too much of abandonment. She was 23 and had a story she preferred not to tell. The daughter of a ruined small farmer, she had given herself to the love promised by a traveling merchant who, upon learning of the child, disappeared like smoke carried by the wind. Her family, bound to conventions that still suffocated women like her, closed their doors to her with the same ease with which one closes an unimportant book. She had only 6,000 reis left, and a dangerous mixture of anger and despair in her chest. She wasn't seeking forgiveness or understanding. She sought to survive, and perhaps to find a power she had never been allowed to have. The improvised fair was happening under the pretext of integration of savages, but everyone knew what it really meant. Indigenous men and women, captured during military expeditions against villages that resisted the expansion of coffee plantations, were offered as temporary servants at very low prices. They were lined up like merchandise, some with irons on their ankles, others merely tied, all marked by looks that oscillated between scorn and indifference. The local administrator, a man with a thick mustache and faded uniform, who called himself Captain Mendonça, announced each of them with descriptions that reduced entire lives to qualities for work. Among them all, however, there was one who stood out not for what he did but for what he refused to do. A tall man, with a blindfold over his eyes, who kept his feet firmly planted on the dusty ground. He did not beg. He did not tremble. He maintained an almost defiant posture in his silence. "This one is untamable," announced the captain with a dry laugh. "They say he was a Botacudo warrior, but he doesn't even open his mouth to eat properly. We've tried everything, even the whipping post, but the wretch seems made of stone. Anyone who wants to try their luck." The bids were sparse. 2 farmers offered paltry amounts, more for the challenge of taming the man than for any usefulness he might have. That's when Teresa, without thinking twice, raised her voice. "I offer 6,000 reis." The silence that followed was cut by laughter. Captain Mendonça stared at her with a mixture of surprise and contempt. "Do you know what you're buying? This one isn't even good for carrying water." Teresa did not back down. She held the man's gaze with a firmness that didn't match her condition. "I know exactly what I'm buying. It's 6,000 reis. Take it or leave it." The auctioneer looked around, waiting for a higher offer. None came. With a gesture of disgust, he struck the gavel. "Sold to the young woman of dubious condition. At least it rids us of a problem." When she approached to take her acquisition, Teresa felt the gazes that followed her. They weren't just of mockery, but of suspicion. A woman alone, pregnant, buying an indigenous man. It was something that defied the silent rules of that society. She ignored them. She untied the ropes that bound the man's wrists, but left the blindfold over his eyes. "Come with me," she said, in a voice that tried to sound authoritative, but carried a tremor that only she perceived. He did not respond, but followed her with firm steps, as if somehow he knew where he was going. The path to the small cabin Teresa rented at the back of an abandoned property was long and silent. The sun punished them, and she felt the child stirring in her womb with each more difficult step. When they finally arrived, she opened the simple wooden door and indicated for him to enter. The cabin was little more than a single room, with an improvised bed in one corner, a wood stove in another, and a few scattered belongings that tried to imitate the idea of a home. Teresa closed the door, and in an impulse she didn't understand herself, removed the blindfold from the man's eyes. What she saw surprised her. There was no fear, anger, or submission in those dark eyes, only untouched dignity, as if nothing they had done to his body could reach what was inside him. "My name is Teresa," she said, suddenly feeling foolish. "You—" He merely turned and sat on the floor, leaning against the farthest wall. He closed his eyes. He showed no hostility, just a distance as vast as the sky that stretched over those lands. Teresa left him there and went to prepare something to eat. She made a simple broth with the few ingredients she had, and when she finished, she took a bowl to him. "You need to eat," she said, extending the food. He did not react. He did not open his eyes. It was as if he had decided that starvation was better than acceptance. She sighed and left the bowl beside him. "As you wish." At night she awoke with pains. The child seemed restless, and Teresa hugged her own belly, whispering words of comfort that were in truth for herself. That's when she noticed a shadow moving in the darkness. The man was standing watching her. Without a word, he approached and offered her something, an infusion made with herbs she recognized from the yard. The smell was strong but not unpleasant. He gestured for her to drink. Hesitantly, Teresa accepted. The liquid went down warm through her throat, and in a few minutes she felt the pains diminish. She looked at him with surprise, but he had already returned to his corner, silent as a shadow. It was the first time she understood. This man was not her property. And perhaps she herself was no longer the owner of her own story. Days passed, establishing a silent routine between them. Teresa never knew his name, so she began calling him Caetano, like the patron saint of those without a voice. He never responded to this name, but he didn't reject it either. Gradually, he began to do small tasks. He lit the fire before she woke, fixed the leaks in the roof, kept animals away from the cabin. All without words, without prolonged glances, as if each gesture was just a silent affirmation of his own humanity, not a service rendered to her. Meanwhile, Teresa's belly grew, as did the hostility of nearby residents. Whispers followed her steps when she went to the village for supplies. "The fallen woman who bought a savage," they said. "What kind of creature will be born in that cabin?" They wondered, as if the mixture of misfortune and difference could generate monsters. It was on a night of violent storm that everything changed. The sky was falling on the cabin, and the fragile walls trembled with each thunderclap. Teresa felt the first contractions, stronger than any pain she had ever known. She curled up on the improvised bed, biting her lips to keep from screaming. There was no one to help her. The village midwife had refused to attend a woman of questionable reputation who lived with a savage. She was alone, as she had always been in the decisive moments of her life, or so she thought. When the pain became unbearable and a scream escaped from her throat, Caetano appeared by her side like an apparition. For the first time since he arrived, he deliberately touched her. His hands were firm and surprisingly gentle. He helped her to lie down more comfortably, tore a clean sheet into strips, brought fresh water, and placed the kettle on the fire. Teresa, between spasms of pain, looked at him in astonishment. "You know what to do?" He did not answer with words, but his gestures were sure, like someone who had attended many births. He began to murmur something in his native language, a sort of rhythmic chant that somehow inexplicably calmed Teresa amid the chaos of pain. For hours, the struggle for life took place in that tiny cabin, illuminated only by the fire and occasional lightning. When the baby was finally born, a girl with golden skin and eyes as dark as night, it was in Caetano's firm hands that she first rested. He cleaned her carefully, checked her small limbs, wrapped her in clean cloths, and delivered her to Teresa with a solemnity that bordered on reverence. "Thank you," whispered Teresa, with tears in her eyes. For the first time she saw something different in his gaze. It wasn't a smile nor joy, it was recognition, as if at that moment both understood that something had irrevocably changed between them. It was only in the morning, when Teresa awoke from exhausted sleep, that she realized he had cleaned the entire room, removing any trace of the difficult birth. Beside the bed, she found a small bowl of manioc porridge, still warm, and some fruit cut with impressive precision. The baby slept peacefully at her side, breathing softly. Teresa ate slowly, observing Caetano, who was sitting near the door, weaving something with palm leaves. "She needs a name," said Teresa, breaking the silence. He raised his eyes briefly, then returned to his work. I'll call her Esperanza." The name seemed to hang in the air between them, loaded with meanings that neither needed to explain. In the days that followed, Teresa observed with fascination how Caetano cared for the child. When she cried at night, he would rise even before Teresa could react. He made small toys of wood and straw that he left beside the improvised cradle. He sang songs in his native language, gently rocking her until she slept. One afternoon, as Teresa washed clothes in the small stream behind the cabin, she heard Caetano speaking, not singing but actually speaking. She approached silently and saw him holding Esperanza in his arms, pointing to the trees, the sky, the birds, and naming them in his language. The intimacy of that moment almost made her retreat, as if she were witnessing something sacred. But then he turned, perceiving her presence. Teresa expected him to stop, to return to his habitual silence. Instead, he continued, now looking directly at her as he spoke. "Yurupari," he said, pointing to a bird. Then he pointed to the water, Ipe, and to the sun, Kwarachi. Teresa repeated the words, feeling them strange on her tongue. He nodded, with what might have been the shadow of a smile. It was the beginning of a new language between them, neither Portuguese nor Caetano's native language, but something that belonged only to the three of them, in that small clearing in the world. As Esperanza grew, becoming a curious and lively child, the cabin slowly transformed into a home. Caetano built an extension, creating a separate room for Teresa and the girl. He planted a small garden that, under his care, thrived even in the poor soil. Teresa, for her part, began to sell lace and embroidery in the village, facing the disapproving looks with the new strength she had found. One afternoon, when Esperanza was almost a year old, Teresa returned from the village earlier than usual. She found Caetano sitting under the shade of a tree, with the girl in his lap. He did not see her arrive, and so he continued speaking, this time in Portuguese with a strong accent, but perfectly understandable. "Birds fly because they believe they can, little Esperanza. They don't think about the weight of their wings, only about the air currents that sustain them." Teresa felt her heart leap. He knew how to speak. All that time he had understood everything she said. She wanted to confront him, ask why he had maintained silence for so long, but something in the scene, the tenderness with which he held Esperanza, the softness in his usually absent voice, made her retreat. Later, when the child was already asleep, Teresa found Caetano in front of the cabin, looking at the stars. "You speak Portuguese," she said simply. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. He turned slowly. "I do," he answered, his voice hoarse from little use. "I learned from the missionaries before my village was attacked." Teresa nodded, sitting beside him on the small improvised porch. "Why did you never speak before?" He was silent for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of many losses. Words are like knives. They can hurt when you least expect it. Silence. Silence is safer. And now? He looked at the window where Esperanza slept. Now she needs words. She needs to know who she is, where she comes from, even if she comes from two worlds that don't understand each other. Teresa felt tears in her eyes. "What's your name?" "Your real name?" "Raoni," he replied. "It means great warrior in my people's language." "Raoni," repeated Teresa, feeling the name take shape on her lips. "Thank you for saving my daughter. For saving us both." He did not answer, but his look said what words could not, that perhaps it was they who had saved him. The next morning, something had subtly changed. Raoni now spoke. Not much, just the necessary. He shared stories of his people with Esperanza, taught Teresa about medicinal plants, warned about the dangers of the forest. The girl grew between two worlds, learning to call things by two names, to see life through two different lenses. But the peace they had built was as fragile as crystal. The world beyond the clearing had not changed, and the suspicious looks in the village were slowly transforming into something more dangerous. Farmer Augusto Mendes, an influential and cruel man, had expanded his lands to the vicinity of the cabin. His henchmen began to appear by chance in the surroundings, observing, measuring, assessing. One day, Felicio, Mendes' trusted foreman, approached Teresa as she sold her embroidery at the fair. "The boss is interested in the land where you settled," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He's willing to offer a reasonable amount for you to move. Teresa felt her stomach sink. It's not mine to sell. I rent it from old Jeremias. Felicio laughed, a sound as rough as sandpaper. Old Jeremias died 2 weeks ago. The boss bought the rights from his nephew. He extended a yellowed paper. You have a month to leave. The boss is generous. He's offering 50,000 raise for the move. Teresa felt her blood freeze. And if we don't accept? Felicio's smile disappeared. That would be a shame. Especially for that Indian you keep there. I heard the police are still looking for him for attacks on settlers. It would be terrible if someone mentioned his whereabouts. When Teresa returned home that afternoon, she brought more than supplies in her basket. She carried a deadline, a threat, and a fear she couldn't name. Rowney immediately realized something was wrong. Esperanza ran to Teresa's arms as she always did, but her mother hugged her with a different urgency, like someone who fears each moment might be the last. What happened? He asked, helping her unload the basket of supplies. Teresa told him about the encounter with Felicio, about old Jeremias's death, about the veiled threat. As she spoke, her hands trembled. We have a month, she concluded, her voice almost disappearing. A month before they come to evict us. Rowney remained silent for a few moments, his face an impenetrable mask. Then he simply said, Then we need to be ready in a month. He didn't speak of fleeing, of separating, of giving up. He spoke like someone facing another storm on a path already marked by many. That night, after Esperanza fell asleep, they talked in low voices, planning each possibility. We could go north, suggested Teresa. They say there's free land on the border with Pará. Rowney shook his head. The north is full of rubber plantations. They enslave Indians and caboclos to extract rubber. It would be trading one danger for another. To the coast, then? I have a distant cousin in Salvador. A white woman with a mixed-race child and an Indian? We would attract too much attention. It would be a matter of time before the authorities found me. Frustration grew in Teresa. Then what? We stay and wait for them to kill us? The harshness in her voice surprised them both. Rowney looked at her firmly. No, we fight. The word hung between them like a dangerous promise. How? Asked Teresa, her voice now almost a whisper. We are just 2 against a powerful farmer. 3, corrected Rowney with a half-smile. Esperanza counts 2. It was the first time Teresa saw him truly smile, and for a moment she forgot about the danger. Besides, he continued, we're not alone. The next day, Rowney disappeared before dawn. He returned only at nightfall, carrying herbs that Teresa had never seen and a bag of seeds. With him came an older man, with dark skin and grey hair, Sebastião, a former slave who had lived in the depths of the forest since abolition. Sebastião knows all the secrets of this land, explained Rowney, and he knows others who, like us, have no place in the world of rich whites. Sebastião became a constant presence in the days that followed. He brought stories, knowledge, and most importantly news from the world beyond the clearing. It was he who told them about Augusto Mendez's real plan. It wasn't just the land the farmer was interested in, but a supposed gold mine in the vicinity. He's hired men from São Paulo, explained Sebastião, while helping Rowney fortify the cabin. They'll arrive at the next full moon to begin exploration. Our deadline is shorter than we thought. 20 days, not 30. Time was slipping like water between their fingers. One night, when there were only 2 weeks left until the deadline, Teresa found Esperanza sitting on Sebastião's lap, listening attentively as the old man told stories about Zumbi dos Palmares and others who had resisted oppression. And so, my little one Zumbi showed that freedom is not something they give us. It's something we conquer. For every day, with courage and wisdom, the girl's eyes shone. At almost 2 years old, she understood more than any child her age should. I am brave, Uncle Sebastião, she stated with the seriousness peculiar to children. Father Rowney says I have the spirit of the tortoise, small but strong. The use of the words Father Rowney hit Teresa like an arrow. They had never explained to the girl who Rowney was in her life. She simply knew, with that instinctive wisdom of children, that he was more than a protector. He was family. Sebastião noticed her look and smiled gently. Children see what is, not what should be according to others, he commented after Esperanza went to sleep. She's lucky. Many grow up without knowing who they really are. It was at that moment that Teresa made a decision. They would not flee, not separate, not give up on the small world they had built. It was time to fight, not with weapons or violence, but with the only strength she had always had, determination. The next morning, she surprised everyone by announcing, "I'm going to the city." Rowney looked at her with concern. "It's dangerous. Mendez has informants everywhere. That's exactly why I need to go. If we just keep hiding, they'll define the terms of the battle. We need to change the rules of the game." Before they could argue, she had already dressed in the only good dress she owned, a dark blue, simple but dignified outfit, inherited from her mother. "Take care of Esperanza," she asked Rowney. "I'll be back before nightfall." The path to the city never seemed so long. Candeias do Norte had grown in recent years, gaining airs of progress with its masonry buildings and newly inaugurated train station. In the center, the imposing mother church contrasted with the simple houses around it. That's where Teresa headed, determined. Father Anselmo was known for his severity, but also for his incorruptibility. She found him in the sacristy, organizing vestments for the next day's Mass. "Father, I need your help," said Teresa, without preamble. The priest looked at her with surprise. He knew the story of this woman through rumors and never expected to see her in church. "God's house is open to all who seek guidance, my daughter," he replied, cautious. "I'm not just seeking guidance, Father. I'm seeking justice." In the next 2 hours, Teresa told the whole story, from her abandoned pregnancy to Mendez's recent threat. She spoke about Rowney, about how he had saved her life and Esperanza's, about the community that was beginning to form around them with Sebastio's help. "They say you're a just man, Father Anselmo. That's why I came here. I don't ask you to protect us, just to witness the truth if necessary." The priest listened in silence, his face impassive. When she finished, he sighed deeply. "What you ask is difficult, my daughter. Augusto Mendez is the greatest benefactor of this parish. So you choose the side of money, not justice?" asked Teresa, with a boldness that surprised them both. Instead of taking offense, the priest smiled sadly. "You remind me of my sister, may God have her." Same sharp tongue. He stood up and went to a shelf from which he took an old book. From inside it, he pulled out a yellow document. "I knew old Jeremias. He was a man of faith, despite all his sins." He extended the document to Teresa. He entrusted this to me before he died. It was a will, signed and notarized, leaving the small property where the cabin was to the brave woman and her silent protector, who care for the land better than I ever did. Teresa's name was there, written in the trembling calligraphy of a sick man. "Why would he do this?" she asked, astonished. The priest put the book back on the shelf. "Jeremias lost his daughter to yellow fever many years ago. Perhaps he saw something of the daughter he lost in you. Or perhaps he simply recognized courage when he saw it." Teresa held the paper as if it were a treasure. "Will this protect us?" The priest shook his head. "Not completely. Mendez has the law and money on his side. But it gives you a chance to fight on equal terms." When she left the church, Teresa felt different. No longer a desperate woman, but someone with a purpose. On the way back, she stopped at the small municipal school, where the teacher, Donna Zulmira, a determined middle-aged woman, taught the local children. "I would like to enroll my daughter," she announced, entering the empty room after classes ended. Donna Zulmira looked at her with curiosity. "Your daughter? The girl who lives with that Indian." "With Rowney and me," corrected Teresa firmly. "Esperanza is almost 2 years old, but she already knows letters and numbers. I would like her to attend school when she's old enough." The teacher adjusted her glasses, clearly surprised by the request. "You know it won't be easy for her, don't you? Other children can be cruel. Life is already cruel, Donna Zulmira, but giving up on our dreams would be even crueler." Something in Teresa's determination seemed to touch the teacher. "Bring her when she turns 4. I'll ensure she's treated like any other child." When Teresa finally returned home, the sun was already setting. She found Rowney and Sebastio on the porch with tense expressions. "Where have you been?" asked Rowney, concern evident in his voice. "We were about to go looking for you." In response, Teresa showed the will. As she explained what had happened, she saw hope grow in their eyes. Not the certainty of victory, but the possibility of it. "This changes everything," said Sebastião, examining the document. "Now Mendes will have to face you in court if he wants the land. And we have friends we didn't have before," added Teresa, telling them about the priest and the teacher. That night, while Esperanza slept peacefully, the three adults planned the next steps. The fight would be long, but now they had a strategy. "We need more allies," said Sebastião. "I know others in the area, former slaves, caboclos, even some poor settlers who were deceived by Mendes. Together we are stronger than any farmer." Raoni, who had been silent, finally spoke. "My people had a saying, when the jaguar roars alone, the hunters surround it. When jaguars roar together, the hunters flee." Teresa smiled, covering his hand with hers. It was the first time they had shown physical affection in front of another person. "Then it's time to gather all the jaguars," she said with determination. "We have 12 days until the men from São Paulo arrive. 12 days to build our resistance." The 12 days that followed transformed the small clearing into a fortress of determination. Each evening more people arrived, silently like shadows between the trees. First came Sebastião's friends. Benedito, a huge man with calloused hands and scars on his back that told stories of whippings. Antonia, a tiny woman who knew the secrets of all the herbs that grew in the region. And Josue, a young man of mixed race who had escaped from a rubber plantation in the north. Then came others, families of squatters evicted by Mendes, indigenous people who had survived the same attack that had separated Raoni from his people, workers exploited on neighboring farms. Even a former foreman, Joaquim, who had refused to burn a village on Mendes's orders and had been branded with iron as a traitor. At night, they gathered around the fire, sharing stories, food, and plans. Esperanza circulated among them like a small ambassador, learning words in different languages, enchanting even the most hardened with her innocent curiosity. Teresa realized that something greater than her own struggle was forming there, a community of resistance, united not only against Mendes, but against a system that made the existence of men like him possible. Raoni, once so reserved, revealed himself to be a born strategist. He knew the land like no one else, knew where to establish surveillance, how to create escape routes, how to transform the forest itself into an ally. Mendes expects to find a woman alone and a frightened Indian, he explained in one of the meetings. He will find an army. 7 days before the deadline, the first confrontation happened. Felicio, the foreman, appeared with 2 armed men to remind Teresa of the agreement. He found not only Teresa and Raoni, but Sebastião, Benedito, and 5 other men all standing silent, determined. "What is this?" he asked, his hand instinctively going to the revolver at his waist. "An answer," said Teresa, extending the will. "This land is legally mine. A gift from old Jeremias. If your boss wants it, he'll have to resolve this in court." Felicio visibly paled. "This is forgery. The boss won't like this at all." "Father Anselmo can confirm the authenticity," replied Teresa with a calmness she didn't feel. "And Donna Zulmira will also testify if necessary." They were the 2 most respected names in the region, a man of God and an educator. Felicio retreated, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "The boss will hear about this," he threatened before leaving with his men. "First victory," celebrated Sebastião when they disappeared among the trees. But Mendes won't give up easily. He was right. 3 days later, an official summons arrived. Augusto Mendes was contesting the validity of the will, claiming that Jeremias was not in full possession of his mental faculties when he signed it. There would be a hearing in 2 weeks. "It's a tactic to gain time," explained Sebastião. "The men from São Paulo will arrive before that. He wants the land destroyed before justice decides." Tension grew with each hour. The following night, one of the lookouts spotted men moving in the forest in a reconnaissance expedition. "They're mapping the area," concluded Raoni, planning the attack. 2 days before the deadline, something unexpected happened. Father Anselmo appeared in the clearing, mounted on his old mule, his face marked by concern. "Mendes is furious," he announced, accepting the coffee Teresa offered him. "He's summoned men from all over the region. They won't wait for the arrival of the São Paulo men." The priest looked around, noticing the small community that had formed. "I didn't imagine I would find all this." There was admiration in his voice. You've built something rare here, Donna Teresa, a true community. Before Teresa could respond, Esperanza ran to the priest, offering him a wild flower. For you, she said, with the comic formality of small children. Uncle Sebastião says you're a friend. The priest accepted the flower with gravity, as if it were a sacred relic. Then he took a small package from his cassock. I brought something for you, he said, handing it to Teresa. Inside was a small carved wooden cross and an official document. It's a letter from the district judge. It prohibits any action against this property until the hearing. Teresa felt tears in her eyes. How did you get this? The priest smiled. Let's say that even judges have consciences, especially when reminded of their duties by a man of God. On the morning of the day marked for the arrival of the men from São Paulo, the community of the clearing was prepared. They had the law on their side now, at least temporarily, but they knew that men like Mendes rarely cared about papers signed by distant judges. Raoni had positioned lookouts at strategic points. Benedito and other former slaves had built discreet barricades at the main access points. The women had prepared food for several days in case it became necessary to resist a siege. Esperanza was sent to Dona Zulmira's house in town, protected by the priest. Teresa felt her heart breaking as she said goodbye to her daughter, but she knew it was necessary. I'll be back soon, she promised, kissing her on the forehead. Be brave, my little jaguar. Like the tortoise, replied the girl, serious, small but strong. Noon came and passed without a sign of the invaders. The afternoon advanced, tense, silent. When the sun began to set, Joaquim, the former foreman who was watching the main trail, came running. They're coming, he announced, breathless. At least 20 armed men. Mendes is with them. Raoni took command. Everyone in position. Remember, don't attack first. We have the law on our side. Teresa positioned herself in front of the cabin, the judge's document in one hand, Jeremias's will in the other. Raoni was at her side, a solid presence like a mountain. Behind them, the entire community waited, not hidden but visible, united, determined. When Augusto Mendes emerged from the forest, followed by his armed men, he stopped abruptly. Clearly, he expected to find an isolated cabin, easy to intimidate. Instead, he faced what seemed like a small organized village, with dozens of faces staring at him with silent defiance. What is this? He thundered, turning to Felicio. You said it was just the woman and the Indian. Before the foreman could answer, Teresa stepped forward. This is justice, Mr. Mendes, she said with a clear and firm voice. This land legally belongs to me as confirmed by this will. And this document, she raised the judge's letter, prohibits any action against this property until the hearing. Mendes laughed. A harsh sound without humor. You think a piece of paper stops me? I know there's gold in these lands. It's worth more than all your lives combined. That's when a new voice joined the conversation. There's no gold here at all, Mendes. Everyone turned. It was the engineer who led the expedition from São Paulo, accompanied by 2 assistants. No one had seen him arrive. We did preliminary tests at the coordinates you provided. What you thought was gold is just pyrite, fool's gold. This land is worth nothing beyond what it already produces. The revelation fell like lightning. Mendes's men exchanged confused looks. The farmer paled, then reddened with rage. You're lying. Your informants were wrong, interrupted the engineer, extending maps and documents. Or more likely, they deceived you to receive payment. A murmur ran among the men. Mendes realized he was losing control of the situation. It doesn't matter. This land will still be mine. These savages and runaway slaves cannot— Former slaves, corrected a new voice. Everyone turned again. It was Captain Prestes from the provincial police, accompanied by 4 soldiers and free citizens since abolition. The captain approached, his hard gaze fixed on Mendes. I received reports that you plan a violent action against legally established property. That would be a crime, Mr. Mendes. The farmer seemed cornered. This land. The will is fake. Father Anselmo and I can attest to its validity, said Dona Zulmira, appearing beside the captain, still holding Esperanza's hand, as well as the district judge, who has already issued a preliminary ruling. Mendes looked around, realizing that he was surrounded not just by people, but by a force he didn't understand, the force of a community united by justice. "This isn't over," he threatened, retreating. "The law? The law is on their side today, Mr. Mendez," said the captain firmly. "I suggest you withdraw." The confrontation ended not with shots or blood, but with the silent retreat of a man accustomed to winning by force, defeated by the greater force of union. When Mendez and his men disappeared into the forest, followed closely by the police to ensure their departure, a reverent silence fell over the clearing. It was Esperanza who broke it, running into Teresa's arms. "Did we win, Mother?" The simple question triggered a wave of emotion. Teresa hugged her daughter, feeling tears of relief and joy. "Yes, my little one. We won." Rowney approached, placing one hand on Teresa's shoulder and the other on Esperanza's head. "We won today," he said, with his characteristic wisdom. "Tomorrow will be another battle." But at that moment, tomorrow seemed distant and full of possibilities. The community gathered in celebration, a quiet, respectful celebration, as befitted people who knew the value of hard-won peace. 3 months later, the court hearing officially confirmed Teresa's ownership. But something greater had already been conquered: recognition. The small community of the clearing ceased to be a grouping of fugitives and became the Quilombo do Amanhecer, Dawn Quilombo, a place where former slaves, indigenous people and poor whites lived in harmony, sharing knowledge, work and dreams. Sebastián became its first official leader. Recognized even by local authorities, Dona Zulmira established a school in the community itself, where she taught not only Portuguese and mathematics, but also the languages and traditions of its diverse inhabitants. Father Anselmo celebrated monthly masses there, integrating elements of the various spiritualities present. Esperanza grew as the daughter of many fathers and many mothers, a child of 2 worlds who built bridges between them just by existing. On the 5th anniversary of the Quilombo's founding, Teresa found Rowney sitting alone by the stream, watching the sunset. The years had left some silver threads in his hair, but his bearing remained proud, his presence as powerful as on the day she had first seen him, hooded and chained. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, sitting beside him. He smiled, something he now did frequently. "About circles," he replied. "About how life brings us back to the same places, but different." He extended his hand, revealing something Teresa hadn't seen in years. The 6,000 rays she had used to buy him, carefully preserved. "I kept it to remember," he explained. "Not what was taken from me, but what I found." Teresa covered his hand with hers. "We were 2 castaways," she said softly. 2 loners the world tried to break. "And now we are many," he completed, looking at the vibrant community that extended beyond the stream. That night, as the new moon left the sky exceptionally starry, Teresa wrote in her diary, a habit she had acquired in recent years. Beside the dates and important events, she drew a simple phrase that summarized the journey that had begun with despair and ended with hope. We bought. We learned. We stayed. We loved. The next morning, when Esperanza awoke, she found something new at the foot of her bed. A small wooden sculpture made by Rowney's skilled hands. It was a tortoise, small and strong, carrying the world on its shell. Inside it, carefully folded, was a paper with the 6,000 rays, and beside it, written in Rowney's now fluent calligraphy, "So that you never forget, the greatest value is not in the coins, but in what we choose to do with them. And you who have followed this journey to here, also carry the power to choose the paths you will tread. Like Teresa and Rowney, we all have moments of despair and moments of hope. We all have the capacity to build bridges where others see only abysses." If this story touched your heart, leave your comment telling which moment moved you the most. Share it with someone who also needs a reminder that even in the darkest moments,